right, hello. Thank you all for coming. This is a fantastic turnout for Grounds on the Go. My name is Melissa Henriksen. I work at the Applied Research Institute at the University of Virginia. And with Katie Murphy from the UVA Research Park, we organized this seminar bringing faculty from the university up to the research park to talk about their research, their interests, and the like. So we'll have a couple more of these in the spring semester, so keep your eye out for them. So today we're going to have a fantastic discussion with Professor Paul Friedman about the 2016 election. So before Paul gets started, I want to just introduce him. So Paul got his PhD from the University of Michigan, and he's an associate professor in the Department of Politics at UVA. He also serves as the associate department chair. Friedman teaches courses in public opinion, media and politics, voting behavior, research methods, and the politics of food. He is a founding member of the UVA Food Collaborative, the recipient of the University of Virginia Alumni Board of Trustees Teaching Award, and has served as the first Edward Ayers Advising Fellow. He's co-author of Campaign, Advertising, and American Democracy, and his work has appeared in several journals, including the American Journal of Political Science, and Hedgehog Review, and Slate. Friedman served as a research director for the Pew Project on Campaign Conduct at the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership, and was a senior scholar at the Pew Partnership for Civic Change. He currently serves as academic director for the Mormon Summer Institute, and is on the board of the Jefferson Institute, and is a senior scholar at the UVA Center of Politics. Since 2000, Friedman has been an election analyst for ABC News in New York.
Katie for making this possible, and thank all of you for joining us today as we attempt to unpack the 2016 presidential election. And let me begin by acknowledging that this is not the talk I thought I would be giving when Melissa first asked way back in August, would I give a talk about the election. This is the talk I thought I'd be giving. And indeed, it's the talk that I suspect most observers of the election thought that we'd be giving or hearing. Part of what one needs to unpack is, why did our expectations diverge from the reality that emerged late on the evening of November 8th? So, having abandoned this title, I thought, okay, now it's on to making sense of it all, which very quickly morphed into where to even begin. How does one make sense of what seemed at the time, as it was unfolding on November 8th to November 9th, to be so historic, so monumental, and so shocking? It's hard to do. And I think we are just at the beginning of making sense of this. And there are a number of different things that we need to make sense of, one of which is, how did so many of us get this so wrong in terms of our expectations? Now, I have a less ambitious task that I've set myself for today, and that is simply to begin to lay out the pieces of the puzzle. All right? We'll do this, and then over the next weeks, months, years, we will see how they fit together. So I want to walk today through some of these puzzle pieces with you, but I need to begin with a caveat. And the caveat / warning is, take everything I say with a grain of salt. And here's why. There's absolutely no way that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee for president, said Paul Friedman of the University of Virginia, consistently, repeatedly, and publicly from June through September of 2015, at which point, I still said it, I just said it more quietly and privately. I didn't see that coming, but I was not alone. Here is, appropriately, a tweet to Donald Trump. Memo to @RealDonaldTrump. We are past peak Trump. Sell-by date approaching, plan exit strategy before Iowa. Adios, amigo. #art of the withdrawal. Cute. That was Bill Kristol in July of 2015. Not Billy Crystal, but Bill Kristol, who should know better than Billy Crystal. All right. Trump's campaign will fail by one means or another. If you want absurd specificity, and we do, I recently estimated Trump's chance of becoming the GOP nominee at 2%. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Nate Silver, Mr.538.com in August of 2015. But it gets better, right? This is all by way of suggesting that I'm in good company, right? In my fabulous wrongness. If Trump is nominated, then everything we think we know about presidential nominations is wrong. Mr. Crystal Ball, Larry Sabato, August 2015. Larry was right that we were wrong. We did not see the Trump nomination. And by we, I mean a lot of people. I mean political scientists, I mean journalists, I mean pundits. We also didn't see the election. Here's the best one. I'm so certain Trump won't win the nomination that I'll eat my words if he does. Literally, the day Trump clinches the nomination, I will eat the page on which this column is printed in the Washington Post. I have this confidence for the same reason Romney does. Americans are better than Trump. That, by the way, is possibly future Secretary of State Mitt Romney. Dana Milbank in the Washington Post. And here's Dana Milbank eating his words in May of 2016. And we're not going to watch the video, but suffice to say, he hired a chef to prepare an 8-course meal of his column. He has 2 bottles of Trump wine and a bottle of Pepto-Bismol. Okay. We were all eating words and have been eating our words throughout this. This is, from the perspective of an academic, fascinating, exciting, challenging. It's all sorts of other things for people with other perspectives, like voters, citizens, subjects. Here are the 6 pieces of the puzzle that I want to briefly explore. These are pieces that interest me. They're pieces that I think are worth attending to and looking more closely at as we move forward. 1, expectations. What were we expecting and why? 2, the results. What did they look like? 3, I want to say a brief word about favorability ratings. I want to look very quickly at money because there are some real surprises there. I want to look at advertising. And I actually want to look at a couple of ads. We'll do that together. And then I want to look at exit poll data, specifically race, gender, income, education. We'll take a very quick look at age as well. And then the one true thing never to forget about American politics, and I think we forgot it, and what it means for how to understand this election. Okay, those are the puzzle pieces. I will be as efficient as possible. There are some, if you like numbers, you've come to the right talk. If you don't, close your eyes and listen. All right. Huffington Post aggregation of all of the polls in the presidential election race. Some of you have seen this before. For some of us, it's extremely familiar because probably during the last week or 2, you were checking it every day, at least. And what you can see is, after Trump announces, right, he gets a big bump. Hillary Clinton, whose approval, and there's just a line drawn through the data, right? It's just a fancy regression line coming up with Huffington Post's own particular brand of aggregation. One of the exciting things about public opinion in the Electoral College now is that we have multiple aggregators which allow us to make sense of polling data in ways that weren't possible or at least weren't accessible before. So Clinton's big advantage comes down once Trump jumps in. You can see as the year goes on, she maintains her advantage. It's higher at some points. It comes down as Trump gets the Republican nomination. It grows after the Republican and Democratic conventions. Then it comes down again. I should use this instead. Then it goes up, and then we're in the very last weeks of the campaign, and it begins to come down. It ends up with Clinton having about a 5-point advantage. That was actually a bigger advantage than some other places. Here's what Nate Silver's 538 looked like. 46% Clinton, 42% Trump. And at the time, Nate Silver took a lot of heat when he reduced his estimated probability that Hillary Clinton would win the election to about 75%, and people who thought that the estimate should have been at 80%, 90%, Sam Wang at Princeton had it at 99% probability that Clinton would be elected president through the Electoral College. People said, Nate Silver, what are you doing? Why are you so pessimistic? Now, even through his pessimism, right, here's where he ended up. This is the 538, and again, I suspect, show of hands if you've seen this before. All right, as I suspected. 71.4 probability that Hillary Clinton is elected president, only 28.6% probability that Trump would be elected president. What do we see? We see something that's pretty familiar. We see a predicted Electoral College map that looks a lot like it did in 2012, with Clinton winning states that Obama won either in 12 or in 2008, with close races in places like North Carolina, Florida, and Nevada. Less close, still somewhat questionable races in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Colorado, New Mexico. So what happened? This is what happened. 232 electoral votes for Clinton, 306 now that Michigan has certified its results for Donald Trump. Clinton with 48% of the popular vote, Trump with 46.3%, and this is as of a few days ago. As counts continue, these numbers will adjust. There are some recounts that will be underway in Wisconsin, maybe some other places. I don't anticipate huge changes. I think we're looking at probably where we're going to end up. Of course, the last time that the winner of the popular vote did not win the electoral vote was 2000, when Al Gore won the popular vote by about 550,000 votes, but lost the Electoral College after just missing Florida by 500 and I think it's 27 votes, no 1,000, 527 votes in Florida. We've seen this before, right? It's, or most of us in this room remember that vividly. What we see is that Florida, which had been won by Obama in 2012, flipped. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa also flipped. Florida was always going to be flippy. Wasn't a huge surprise, right? Most people towards the end thought that Florida was leaning towards Clinton, but in fact, it went Trump. Ohio and Iowa, also not as surprising. Here's where the surprises were: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So, if we look at Pennsylvania, here's what the state looks like. Philadelphia and the suburbs, blue. Pittsburgh, blue. The appropriately named Center County, blue. It's home to Penn State. Most of the rest of the state, solid red. And a Trump lead, I don't know if you can read it, it's 48.4% for Trump, 47.3% for Clinton. And the actual count, 2.959 million versus 2.895 million. An extremely close election. Michigan, an even closer election. Again, we see Detroit, the Detroit surrounding counties, Ann Arbor, home to the University of Michigan, all blue, but the rest of the state mostly red. And this race, 2.3 million votes for Trump, just under 3, 2.258 for Clinton, right? This is extremely narrow, an extremely close victory for Trump in a state that most people didn't expect. Wisconsin, final state, same thing. Strong Democratic turnout and voting in urban places and in college places. Trump wins 47.2 to 46.4%, but extremely close. We're talking in these places, you know, in the case of Michigan, 11,000 votes. 11,000 votes. And I want to come back to these three places. Here's what the state map looks like. And now I just want to show you some maps because I think they're really cool. Okay? I was trying to come up with a good reason to show you, and I realized I don't have one, but these are really neat. These are maps that are put together by a physics professor at the University of Michigan. And here's 2016 based on states, right? And one of the things that this illustrates is just how much land voted for Donald Trump. But of course, land doesn't vote, people vote. And so when he rescales this to come up with a population-weighted cartogram, here's what it looks like, okay? So the whole country, you can see, now it's a little bit more blue than red, and actually it looks very, very close. Here's the county map, and I think this is really important to recognize. Even states where the Republicans, well, where Trump won this year or Republicans regularly win, have some very, very blue counties, right? Spanish-speaking counties in South Texas, certainly Miami-Dade and surrounding counties there. Even, you know, there are pockets of blue, but when we once again rescale for population, here's what it looks like. It's kind of satisfying to see that map crumple up. And now, right, because these places are more populous, now you can see, even at the county level, right, there's more blue than there would otherwise be. And here's a version of it that just fades it, right, as a reminder that even in a blue county, you've got people voting red and vice versa. Okay, so those are the maps. They're cool. I love them. Wanted to share them with you. We've looked at results. We looked a little bit at expectations. Now I want to talk quickly about favorability ratings, because part of this story is the unprecedentedly low favorability ratings of both candidates. At the end of October, the averaged favorability rating for Clinton was negative 10.1 points. What does that mean? 43.1% favorable, 53.2% unfavorable. That's pretty unfavorable, right? Americans, in the aggregate, had a net unfavorable evaluation of the Democratic candidate. But their evaluation of Trump was even more strikingly unfavorable. Only a third of Americans had a favorable impression of our now president-elect at the end of October. Almost 2/3 had an unfavorable impression. So his net favorability was negative 27.5. Here's what that means. It means that we have a president-elect who is starting out with a lower favorability rating than any of the previous, the most recent presidents-elect. Bill Clinton had a 58% favorable rating. These are Gallup data. George W. Bush, 59%. Obama, 68%. Trump, not a majority, 42%. He's got a 55% unfavorability rating, which is 20 points less favorable than Bill Clinton. Okay, so the unfavorability of his candidacy is setting the stage for his presidency. Presidents traditionally enjoy a honeymoon period of relatively high levels of public approval. It remains to be seen, in my view, which you should take with a grain of salt, what President Trump's honeymoon period will look like, how long it will be, or even if there will be one in terms of public opinion. Okay. Very quickly, money, and then the air war. Hillary Clinton, and these are Federal Election Commission data as of the end of October, right? So these numbers will go up with the final reporting period. These data are aggregated by opensecrets.org. Hillary Clinton raised about $500 million, and outside groups, the 527s, the 501c3s and 501c4s, the super PACs, raised $189 million on behalf of Clinton. Spent $189 million on behalf of Clinton. Trump was significantly outspent and outraised by Clinton, and the amount of outside money spent on behalf of Donald Trump was negligible, under $60 million. Here are the other candidates: Johnson with 11 million, McMullen with 1 million, Stein with 3.5 million. By way of comparison, in 2012, Obama's campaign spent 721 million. And outside, I haven't talked about party spending this year, but look at this, 131 million in outside spending. For Romney, 450 million, with another 400 million in outside spending. Okay? So, two important points to note. Clinton and Trump are raising and spending far less money than Romney and Obama 4 years earlier. Second, there is a huge disparity, with Clinton raising and spending far more money than Trump. That disparity is reflected in the number of ads that they were able to broadcast. Here's why that's important. What we knew heading into Election Day is that Donald Trump's strongest base of support seemed to be among those potential voters who are least likely to vote without a real effort to mobilize them, which is to say, low income and less educated rural white voters. Okay? What we know, what political science knows, is that the single best predictor of voter turnout is education. So, if you're the Trump campaign, how are you going to get your base mobilized? You need to spend money. What do you spend that money on? You spend it on the air game and the ground game. In terms of the ground game, what it takes to knock on doors, get people to the polls, remind people to vote, make phone calls, is staff and offices. Consistently throughout this campaign, Hillary Clinton's ground game was far superior to that of Donald Trump. More offices, more staff, fueled by more money. And not just a little more staff and a few more offices. She had twice the number of offices in North Carolina. She had offices all over the state, twice as many as he did. And that pattern was repeated in more or less every battleground state, right? So she has the money, she has the offices, right? She has the staff, she has the infrastructure to mobilize her supporters, and he doesn't. So when we ask the question, why did so many people get this wrong? Part of the answer is that the things we normally consider to be important, the things we think matter, money, staff, ground infrastructure, and advertising, were all consistent with Clinton's advantages in the polls. All right, so let's talk about advertising quickly. Because this is what money buys. It buys polls, it buys staff, but it buys advertising. And what money on television advertising buys isn't making elaborate, it's not very hard or very expensive to make an ad. Our students literally do that every year, right? They make really good campaign ads. What costs money is broadcasting those ads and broadcasting them strategically in the media markets that matter, in the media markets that will make a difference. So here's what campaign advertising looked like in 2012. Generally speaking, we have three pools of money: the campaign, the party, and outside groups. And what we see here roughly tracks what we saw with money a few minutes ago. These are numbers of ads. Barack Obama broadcast from June to October, right? And these are simply the most recent data that I've got available for 2016. So from June to October, Barack Obama broadcast almost 500,000 ads. That's a lot. The Democratic Party stepped in a little bit with a token 7,000. Outside groups supplemented with 56,000. All told, during this period, the 523,000 ads were broadcast on behalf of Obama. That was much more than the Romney campaign was able to do, but Romney had much more help from the party. The Republican Party, broadcast almost 250,000 ads on Romney's behalf. So Obama had an advantage, right? And a real advantage in terms of the campaign's own ads. Now let's look at 2016. Here's Clinton's ads. A significant reduction from 2012 levels. 200,000 ads fewer all told. More ads from super PACs and other outside groups than Obama saw, but far fewer ads from the Clinton campaign than from the Obama campaign. And here's the really interesting part. There's Trump. That's pretty close to invisible with respect to advertising, okay? And this is, of course, starting on June 8th. If we look at the primary period, one of the shocking points about Trump's primary victory is that he did it without advertising. Why? He didn't need to. He enjoyed so much free media, so much media coverage, and we can look later, I've got a slide on the sheer quantity of media mentions. The media, it's absolutely the case. It's not controversial. It's empirical. The media mentioned Trump throughout the primary season more than any other Republican, and indeed more than any other candidate. When the general election rolls around, all right, he's up. There's 100,000 ads on behalf of Trump. But this is part of what's so fascinating, that he was able to win the Electoral College while being so out-advertised by Clinton. Now, a couple of graphs to give you a sense of the concentration. This is television advertising from September to October. What I want you to see, first of all, is these places have something in common. They're all in Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, or Ohio, or Nevada, okay? These were the top media markets during this period, or some of the top media markets. But the other thing I want you to see is that the blue bar is significantly higher than the red bar. Clinton is blowing him away in every media market. Here's more. Cleveland, Raleigh, Columbus, Jacksonville, again. All of these ads were concentrated in just a small number of states. When we look at a longer period, we see the same thing. Orlando, Tampa, Las Vegas, Charlotte, Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, etc. And in every single market, Clinton is out advertising Trump during this entire period. Overall, she has about a 3-to-1 advantage. That's amazing. That's amazing, A, that she had such an advantage, and B, that she lost the electoral vote with such an advantage. One very interesting snapshot of advertising comes at the very end of the race, the last 2 weeks of October. What is Donald Trump doing? He's advertising in Virginia. Seemed crazy. Some of us even said, that's crazy. Some of us in this room, me. Why is he advertising in Virginia? Colorado. But then look at this. He's in Michigan. He's in Wisconsin during the last 2 weeks. As the postmortems move forward, and as we get a more complete picture of advertising, I hypothesize, I suspect, that part of the story is this bought him enough of a margin. Look at this. I mean, we're talking about 11,000 votes, and he's out advertising her, not by a lot, right? Not by a lot, but he's got an advantage in that state. Could that yield an 11,000 vote margin? Possibly. Okay. So we've talked about expectations. We've looked at results and maps. Looked briefly at favorability ratings, money, the air war. Talked a little bit about the ground war. Race, gender, income, and education. So for this, we turn to the exit polls. Are they perfect? No. Are they better than nothing? Absolutely. These data come from a collaborative effort undertaken by all of the major networks: ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, the Fox News Channel, and the Associated Press. And together, these organizations have, for the last couple of decades, undertaken a massive exit poll, tens of thousands of people. So these data are from that, and they shed light on the nature of voting in this election. First, Donald Trump won the white vote strongly, 57% to 37%, a 20-point gap, okay? And that's among the largest we've ever seen. In fact, it's probably tied for the largest we've ever seen. Whites made up a slightly smaller slice of the electorate in 2016 than they had in 2012, 71% versus 72% in 2012. Latinos, 11% versus 10% in 2012. It's interesting to note that 28%, according to the exit polls, of Latinos voted for Trump. Only 8% of African Americans, 27% of Asians, 36% of people of other races. But in terms of a basic slice of the electorate, whites are whites voted for Trump. No other group did. Here's age. And I want to call your attention to a few things. Here's age in 2012. 18 to 29-year-olds make up 19% of the electorate. They make up 19% of the electorate in 2016. This group voted 60% Obama, only 55% Clinton. In 2012, Obama wins the two youngest groups. Romney wins the two older groups. And we see about the same pattern in 2016. The story of age in 2016 is therefore similar to the story of age in 2012. And here's gender. In 2012, women made up 53% of the electorate, according to the exit polls. Men made up 47%. In 2016, women made up 53%, men made up 47%. There was no surge of women coming into the electorate in numbers that outpaced men. Some expected that. It was not an unreasonable expectation given the combination of the first woman on the at the top of a ticket, major party ticket, and Donald Trump's statements about women. It was entirely reasonable to imagine that that women would make up a greater share of the electorate in 2016. It was also entirely reasonable to imagine that women would vote for Hillary Clinton in greater numbers than they had 4 years earlier for Barack Obama. In 2012, women voted 55% for Obama. In 2016, they vote 54% for Clinton. So, if anything, it's a little less. I would say it's about the same. This is in some ways the dog that didn't bark, right? This is an expectation that was out there that we saw regularly, but we didn't see any real change with respect to gender. Now, it's going to get a little bit more nuanced in a moment. Here's race and gender, right? So white men are far more likely to vote for Trump, 10 points more likely than white women. 62% white men, 52% white women. Black women are more likely to vote for Clinton than black men. And there's rougher parity among Latino women and Latino men. Okay. So there's a gender gap among whites. There's a gender gap among whites. There's a gender gap among blacks and Latinos as well. All right. What's the story we all heard in the immediate aftermath of the election? It wasn't just whites. It was poor whites. It was working class whites. It was working class whites in factory, Rust Belt places like Michigan and Western Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that led to this victory. So a few things to note about that. First, lower income voters voted for Clinton, not for Trump. Higher income voters split their votes, 47%, 47%. Trump wins the 30% of the electorate, making between $50,000 and $100,000. Median household income is somewhere around $53,000, $56,000, right? So they're splitting the higher income. She's winning the lower income, and he's winning the middle income. Moreover, when one looks at the correlation between income and voting at the county level, it's among whites. No, at the county level, it's absolutely the case that lower income counties voted for Trump over Clinton. But that's because lower income counties are also lower education counties, places where people have lower levels of education. And it turns out that when it comes to understanding voting in 2016, education matters more than income. Trump wins slim majorities among the half of the electorate with less than a college education. Clinton wins among college graduates and those with more than a college education. The education gap is more clear, is stronger, is more persistent and robust than the income gap in 2016. Now, I want to suggest that there's something that helps make sense of what we saw on Election Day, or the next day. And that's a very basic feature of American politics that we all know, that we all take for granted, and that we teach regularly. Okay? And let me say that this is in part, right, against the backdrop of an argument that the way to understand Trump's victory, given everything that I've talked about, is by focusing on low-educated, non-college educated white voters, right? That's the story that's emerging. And if you're a Democrat, right, that fits with stories about whom you're blaming, right? How did this happen? Well, it happened that Donald Trump was able to speak to the concerns, the fears, possibly the racial resentment of these low-income voters living in, low-education voters living in these rural places, these rural counties around the country, dealing with economic dislocation, economic anxiety. That's the story. And that's an important part of the story. But here's another piece of the story that I think we have to remember. And I want to introduce it with, I want to say a classic, but it's really the classic text in American political science, The American Voter. It's classic not only because it is the most boring cover of a book ever published in any discipline. This is the cover, right, of the unabridged edition. The abridged edition looks pretty much the same, right? We're very modern. We're not a discipline known for our style or our sense of design for the most part, although I think that's changing a little bit. Campbell, Converse, Miller, and Stokes. This book, published in 1960, really established the template for thinking about electoral behavior in the way that we still do today. In part, it was a series of methodological innovations, but in part, it was the introduction of a very fundamental principle that was relatively new at the time, and that's party identification. What this book, published in 1960, that we still assign to our graduate students today, and we don't assign it the way we often do, look at how wrong, how misguided these people were 50 years ago, but rather, right, how many insights we can still glean from this text. The idea is that a party is not simply an organization that you join, but party identification in the American context in the late 1950s forward is the primary lens by which we make sense of the political world, the primary construct that we use to orient ourselves politically. And part of what has grown out of this is an understanding of election campaigns as efforts to mobilize party identification. And we use the language of bringing partisans home. So what we often see, what we almost always see, is a narrowing as the election moves forward. As partisans who were, maybe they're weak Democrats or weak Republicans, and they're thinking about the other candidate, they're thinking about a third party, but by the time the campaign is over, they have come home to their home party. Here's why I think this is particularly significant in 2016. In 2016, we had a situation in which one party was disadvantaged. The Democratic Party was disadvantaged because Barack Obama had been in office for 2 terms. Time for a change, literally, right? All else equal, you expect an advantage to the party out of power after 2 terms. In 2016, Hillary Clinton and the Democrats believed that they were confronting a candidate so uniquely unqualified, unappealing, and ill-equipped to be the president that party ID would be transcended. Donald Trump knew that if he could get Republicans to come home to vote their party, not the man, he would enjoy the advantage of coming in as the party out of power. I'm almost done. I want to share a Trump ad, a Clinton ad, and then why I think this matters. Here is a Donald Trump ad that, in my view, says to Republicans, come home. Don't forget who we are up against. We're up against a Clinton, right? And if you're a Republican, you have spent 25 years knowing that the Clintons are corrupt, that they are perhaps evil, right? And that there is no way that you as a Republican can vote for Hillary Clinton. And Trump, in his advertising, particularly at the end, is reminding Republicans of that and saying, come home. Hillary Clinton thinks, her campaign has said, John Podesta has said, the Comey letter, the FBI letter reigniting the email scandal was our downfall. I think there's a sense in which that is right. And this ad, which was broadcast in multiple media markets in the last 3 days of the race, brings that scandal up and that letter up. Here it is.
The Clintons, from dead broke to worth hundreds of millions. So how did Hillary end up filthy rich? Pay-to-play politics. Staggering amounts of cash poured into the Clinton Foundation from criminals, dictators, countries that hate America. Hillary cut deals for donors. Now the FBI has launched a new investigation. After decades of lies and scandal, her corruption is closing in.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Okay, a reminder, come home, Republicans. You can't vote for her. And here's what Clinton airs in the last 3 days.
Putting a wife to work is a very dangerous thing. When I come home and dinner's not ready, I go through the roof.
Grab them by the and when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
More accusers coming forward to say they were sexually assaulted by Donald Trump.
And I'll go backstage before a show.
Yes.
And everyone's getting dressed.
Donald Trump walked into the dressing room while contestants, some as young as 15, were changing.
And standing there with no clothes. You see these incredible looking women.
I'd look her right in that fat, ugly face of hers.
She ate like a pig.
A person who's flat-chested is very hard to be a 10.
So you treat women with respect?
I can't say that either.
All right, good.
I'm Hillary Clinton, and I approve this message.
So Donald Trump is saying Republicans come home. Hillary Clinton is saying you can't vote for him. Okay? And in the end, the American voter, the book, not the person, is right. Right? Here's the last table I want to share. No, this is not the last table. Sorry. Right, sorry. This is the almost penultimate, the quasi, the hemi-penultimate, I don't even know what the word is. Here's why the American voter is right. Look at how strong party ID is in 2012. 92% of Democrats vote for the Democrat. 93% of Republicans vote for the Republican. It's less in 2016, but it's not as less as Hillary Clinton and her campaign and many Democrats and many observers ever anticipated. 89% of Democrats vote for Clinton. 88% of Republicans vote for Trump. 88% of Republicans are not low-income, low-educated, rural-dwelling, blue-collar working, Obamacare-hating, racially resentful white men. They're just not, okay? And what this means is that many Republicans, not those other Republicans who live in those places, right, but the Republicans who we are, you are, right, whom you know, we're voting for Donald Trump. Last table, education among whites by gender and vote choice. White college education, white college educated women, a fifth of the electorate, they voted for Clinton. Just barely, 51%. White non-college educated women, well, they voted for Trump by a big margin, 61% versus only 34% for Clinton. White college educated men, 53%, right? Now, they're not all Republicans, but a lot of these are white college educated Republicans, and they vote for Trump. They came home to Trump, right? This is what we've been hearing about, that the 16% of the electorate made up of white non-college educated men, 71% Trump, only 23% for Clinton. But I want to suggest, right, that if you, oh, and then non-whites, of course, 74-21. So let's think about this for a minute. And I want to think about this group because this is the story of party identification. This is the story of the Comey letter. This is the story of people coming home to their party, even in the face of a candidate who says, does, and believes the things that, you know, we don't have to take Clinton's word for it, right? We've heard Donald Trump say it himself. That's the power of party identification. So, what would it have taken if we just look at these voters? Here's what it would have taken. In Pennsylvania, white college-educated men voted 39% Clinton, 56% Trump. If they had voted 3 points more Clinton and 3 points less Trump, would have flipped the state. Michigan, 36% of white college-educated men voted for Clinton, 58% for Trump. If they had voted only 1 point more Clinton and 1 point less Trump, it would have flipped the state. Wisconsin, 3 points more Clinton, 3 points less Trump, that would have flipped the state. Okay. I am absolutely not suggesting that non-college educated white voters are not a big part of this story. They are. What I want to suggest here is that as we move forward and begin to look at more puzzle pieces and then begin to fit these pieces together, we pay attention to the people who a lot of Democrats would say and have said ought to know better, right? The whites with a college education voting for Trump. And how narrow how small a proportion of them would have had to flip in these 3 states to yield an electoral college result that matched the popular vote. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave you with that. There's so much more to say. There's so much more that we can talk about now and as we move forward. But I really want to thank you for your really impressive attention to a whole lot of numbers. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's okay with me. Yeah.
The fact that Clinton spent all her energy trying to convert Republicans, if she had targeted her ads and done more to encourage Democratic turnout. So as part of the story of the election, the Democrats turned out at a lower rate than they did for Obama.
Okay. So yes, a little bit. Okay. And in part that has to do with well. Yes, a little bit, which is to say that there were more Republicans in the 2016 electorate than in the 2012 electorate. I'm not sure that that's a Clinton story. That may actually be a piece of the Trump story, mobilizing some Republican voters. I also don't want to give the impression that Hillary Clinton and her campaign did not work extremely hard to mobilize Democrats. They did, right? And they kept states like Virginia, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, right? New Hampshire, another closely fought swing state. What I do want to suggest is that there were states that may have been taken for granted where there was insufficient attention. And that's where Michigan and Wisconsin come in. A few days before the election, there was a very interesting signal. And that signal was the fact that President Obama went to lead a rally at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. That made some Democrats really nervous. Why is the president going to Ann Arbor? I don't remember, it was 4 or 5 days before the election. It means that there was some inkling at that point that Michigan might be in play. Yeah.
It seems to me that in 2008 there was a bit of a message. I mean, Clinton against Obama, she was trounced, right? So, and that
in the primary.
And so I'm looking more for a cause than an effect, right? I mean, these are really good. The effect of race, the effect of education, the effect of income, so on and so forth. How much really was dependent on her as a person and the fact that people just couldn't do it?
Okay, so I think there are a few things going on, right? I think that Obama's historic candidacy
trumped a lot,
so to speak.
A lot of things.
Yeah. Many people have suggested that the fault was not in anybody's stars, but in their candidate, right? And that Clinton was just a bad candidate. Maybe, right? We'd want to, I think, unpack that and try to figure out, well, what are the attributes of a good candidate? What are the attributes of a bad candidate? It's absolutely the case. We saw it in the favorability numbers, right, that a lot of people don't have a favorable impression of her. Even a lot of Democrats, particularly after a divisive primary in which, shockingly, in my view, Bernie Sanders did as well as he did. And I say shockingly, in my view, not on policy grounds, but a socialist? Brooklyn accented Bernie Sanders? Would you have, to me, that was almost as shocking as Donald Trump winning the presidency, right? That Bernie Sanders did as well as he did. Again, not because of his economic message or policy positions. Obama in 2008 was able to turn the historic nature of his candidacy into a striking mobilization effort, right? He was able to engage and energize and excite and inspire young people, black people, urban people in ways that...
He was also a media guy, too.
Obama.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, Hillary Clinton's a skilled politician, right? I mean, and yet, never was able to excite, inspire, and enthuse a base of supporters. Even look at college women. I don't know if we looked specifically at college women, but we looked at college-age women. There was not. Had Hillary Clinton been at the top of the ticket in 1986 or 1988 or 1984, I think there would have been an outpouring of young people voting, right? So part of what's going on here has a lot to do with where we are culturally and historically in terms of the first woman candidate versus the first African American candidate. In the back.
So I work in fundraising, and one of the donors that I work with turned out to be funding the fake ads through Facebook. Palmer Luckey, millions of dollars. And I'm just wondering what your thought is about the fake news.
Okay, my main thought is, can we talk and maybe have coffee afterwards? And because I want to write about this. I teach a media and politics class at Siva Vadinathan just left. But I know that we both have a real interest in trying to understand how people make sense of media content, media messages. What are my thoughts on fake news? It should be an oxymoron, right? I mean, fake news, what's that? It's fiction, okay? So there's a few things. One, we have to understand this better. Two, we have to teach our students the difference between journalism and words, right? The difference between a newspaper, and some of them still have some memory of what that is, and a Twitter feed, right? Or now, which isn't to say that there's not a place for social media, for new forms of media. It means that it is essential that we are teaching our students, and I don't mean when they get to my class, I mean before they get to high school, that there is this thing called journalism, right? And I think it means that we collectively need to invest in that thing called journalism, either individually by buying newspapers, or collectively by thinking creatively about how you keep journalism alive. This is tremendously important, not only in the context of social media and fake news, but in the context of a president who has been openly hostile to journalism, to journalists, right? And we all know Mr. Jefferson's quote about preferring to live in a world with newspapers and no government than government without newspapers. I don't really believe him, but I get the point that he was trying to make. Okay? At this moment in time, thinking seriously about the nature, the future, and the protection of journalists and journalism is essential. Yeah. Let me go behind you and then.
So, to your point on the Democrats being disadvantaged this election due to the incumbency of Barack Obama, Donald Trump isn't necessarily the truest conservative out there. He has a lot of, I mean, that's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
He has a lot of liberal viewpoints, trade deals, social stuff like that. So, I guess my question is, how much of the votes do you think were cast blindly just because of the label of republicanism as opposed to the points behind the actual points he supports as opposed to the label?
Yeah, so this is a good question, and it's always a good question. To what extent do issue positions matter in a given election? To what extent do party labels matter? I think that issues matter to some extent in this election, but not all that much. I also think that the penalty for being a Democrat after two successive Democratic administrations is what's important, not the fact that he is the, as you put it, true conservative. So you make a good point, and part of what we need to do is tease out the role of issues in driving the vote. But I think that for most people, they were relatively muted in this election. Yeah.
Given the discrepancy between the popular vote and the Electoral College vote, twice now in recent years, would you advocate looking to reform the electoral vote in any way?
Well, certainly many are, right? And actually, one of the most vocal voices, if you can be a vocal voice, right now, not necessarily for abolishing the Electoral College, but trying to get the electors to vote for a different candidate than Donald Trump, is the mayor of Charlottesville, Mike Signer. Mayor Signer is a political scientist. He has a PhD from Berkeley. He's written a book about demagogues, and he has been proposing in a variety of national media, including Time Magazine and Vox, that electors be, as we sometimes refer to it, faithless, right, and not vote for the candidate to whom they have pledged their vote. There are arguments, and it's actually a very interesting debate over what is more faithful to the original vision of the Electoral College. Because Signer and others argue that the whole point of the Electoral College was to put the brakes on a choice by the people that was rash or ill-considered, right? Now, I don't think he's going to be successful, and I think it would be, we will see if that happens. One Trump elector, I think, resigned and said, I can't vote for Trump, but I'm not going to be faithless. I'm going to simply resign and I guess either let somebody else be appointed. So if this actually happened, it would be a big problem, right? We would, I mean, that would be, I don't know what would ensue. The other thing, and I'll get to you guys, the other proposal, of course, is to abolish the Electoral College. The only way to do that is to change the Constitution. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but I do think there are going to be a lot of people calling for it. You and then you.
Okay. Looking at the book that you referenced, the Come Home theory.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it from a people are fed up with the parties. And having been around this myself for my career, I sense it. I think people are fed up with it. And what Trump said was, if you want more of the same, and one of his more famous quotes was, what do you have to lose? Mm-hmm. And so I think this group that got together and put him in office maybe are saying, look, what they're doing now for the last quarter century of leadership at the executive branch has not worked, and it's going in the wrong direction. So maybe we need somebody really outside of all of that loop.
And I think that you are articulating very well Trump's victory in the primaries, right? I think that there was a third of Republican voters, somewhere between, 33, 36%, who said exactly that, and they chose as the nominee somebody who not only wasn't a true conservative, wasn't really a normal Republican in any of the ways that anybody expected, okay? You may be right. However, these people were still voting for the two major parties in a year that in which they had a choice, right?
I think only because Trump got no candidate of serious note would want to be an asterisk by running as a Green Party, and they're just not going to have a chance in this country. But I think Trump more was forced into the Republican box because that's where he had to go.
Well, because Republicans elected him, nominated him, right? Let's not forget that. It didn't just happen. He didn't just sit down and say, I want to be your nominee. He was voted in, right? And his now chief of staff was head of the party. So I mean, that's not the point that you're making. That's my response, right? And that we shouldn't forget that he was the elected nominee of the Republican Party. I think you're right. I think that he has, as people say, tapped into a desire for change, a desire for something new. The last candidate to really tap into that was Barack Obama, right? Hope, change, something new, something completely different. Bernie Sanders was offering a version of that. But look, Gary Johnson said that that's what I'm right. That's what I'm offering. And there are a lot of people who felt, and we saw his numbers. He didn't do bad. I mean, he did terribly, but not for a third-party candidate.
Then, to that point, what is the impact of the third-party candidates, and what would be the potential if there was something different about it?
Yeah. So let me say this, because I mentioned, and then I think we'll probably wrap up after this. I mentioned 2000, right? We all remember, not all of us, right? But most of us. I'm looking at somebody who I know doesn't remember 2000 because she's my child. And in 2000, it wasn't just that it was so close in Florida. It's that Ralph Nader, without any controversy or argument, drew voters away from Al Gore. Right? There is somebody who disputes this vehemently, and that's Ralph Nader, right? Who has said since 2000, now, it's absolutely the case. If Al Gore had managed to win Tennessee, his home state, from which he had been elected as a senator, and from where his father had been a senator, he would have won the election, right? So every time I blame Ralph Nader for the election of 2000, I always also have to blame Al Gore for not winning his home state. The difference, right, there's an important difference. we know, right? I mean, you can make all sorts of assumptions and divvy up that Nader vote. Gore still wins it, right? You can't do the same thing as readily. Now, what we need in 2016, we can and should look at those surveys, exit poll surveys, and other sources of data who ask Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson voters, who was your second choice, right? Some of them would have stayed home, but others would have split, right? Many of them would have voted for Trump if Johnson wasn't on the ticket. So we don't have, so yeah, no, but what I'm saying is that we don't have the same kind of certainty in 2016 about the impact of those third-party candidates, third and fourth party candidates. I mean, there are dozens of candidates on the ballot. We just don't hear about most of them, right? It's a long list. You can look it up online. It's kind of fun. Some of them have funny names. They don't actually use their real names, so it's always fun to look at with students, right? It's not just 3 or 5 or 20 people on the ballot. It's it's a couple of hundred. So my point is, yeah, I totally agree. We ought to ask what were the effects of Stein and Johnson in particular, but we don't know in 2016 the way we really did in 2000. All right, thank you for your attention, and have a great day. Thank you.